Welcome everyone to tonight's talk, Building a Sustainable World, How Purpose-Driven Companies Are Doing Well by Doing Good. It was Earth Week last week, and President Biden announced a bold goal to slash carbon emissions in the United States in half by 2030. That's going to require tremendous actions by corporations and by all of us. So I can't think of a more important program than our discussion tonight. Sustainability and corporate citizenship have become business necessities in our rapidly changing lives. As the world confronted the pandemic, we also sharpened our focus on the existential threat of climate change and the need for social equity and inclusive growth. Purpose-driven companies such as Colgate, Unilever, and Societe Generale understand that focusing on sustainability and environmental, social, and governance issues, or ESG, is not just a way to manage risk, but also to maximize opportunity and drive innovation and long-term value. Consumers want to buy from companies that are sustainable. Employees want to work for companies that lead with purpose. And investors increasingly want to invest in companies that are focused on ESG issues. So I'm thrilled to welcome tonight Ann Tracy, who's Chief Sustainability Officer for Colgate-Palmolive, Marcella Manubens, Global Vice President, Integrated Social Sustainability for Unilever, and Carl Peterson, Chief Sustainability Officer, Americas for Societe Generale. Thank you to the Princeton Club of New York for sponsoring tonight's program, and to our co-sponsors, the Princeton Association of New York City and Conscious Capitalism. So it's an honor to introduce our guest tonight, starting with Ann Tracy. As Colgate-Palmolive's Chief Sustainability Officer, Ann leads Colgate's global sustainability strategy and their key initiatives, integrating a strong technical foundation across people, performance, and planet into commercial strategic purpose. Ann holds a BA degree in applied science, a BS degree in mechanical engineering, and a master's of engineering degree in manufacturing systems. Most recently, she completed a certificate of sustainability from the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Carl Peterson is Chief Sustainability Officer Americas at Societe Generale. He and his team focus on advising clients across the entire range of ESG topics and developing new tools to help meet the ESG needs of clients and of the bank, specifically in the Americas. Carl joined Societe Generale in 2007 as head of Ratings Advisory Americas, and this is a role he continues in addition to his duties as Chief Sustainability Officer. And Marcella Manubens is Global Vice President for Integrated Social Sustainability at Unilever. She joined in 2013 and led the social impact strategy and expansion of the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, enhancing livelihoods ambition, incorporating human rights, women's empowerment, and inclusive business. In 2016, she assumed expanded responsibility for all areas of supply chain sustainability, social sustainability, while continuing to lead the global human rights agenda. Marcella is a board member of Sir Kensington's Integrity Board member, a member of the Advisory Group on Human Rights to the UK Foreign Secretary, member of the Consumer Goods Forum Coalition of Action on Human Rights, and advisory board member at the Geneva Center for Business and Human Rights. And I'm Wendy Gerber, CEO of the International Consulting Group, a global strategy firm driving business growth for many of the world's leading corporations with a triple bottom line approach focused on ESG strategy and integration. I've led marketing, communications, corporate strategy, employee engagement, governance, and sustainability for corporations including Ralph Lauren, Citigroup, and Kenneth Cole. I'm also a member of the board of directors of Conscious Capitalism New York City, an organization driving the movement to reimagine capitalism. And Ann, Carl, and I are also members of the Sustainability Innovation Committee of the French American Chamber of Commerce. Marcella, I think we have to get you involved with that too. Tonight we'll be chatting for about 50 minutes, and then our speakers will answer questions from the audience for about 15 minutes or so. Please remember to click on the Q&A tab and type your questions into the box, and we'll get to as many as we can. So let's set the stage for our audience. Why is it important for companies to lead with purpose, and what does that actually mean? Can companies really do well by doing good? And let's start with you.
Sure. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be with all of you tonight. And I've gotten to know Carl and Marcella a lot better. I already knew Wendy, so this has been fun for me. So purpose. So Colgate, we have a new growth strategy. We tend to think of our strategies in 5-year buckets, and our next growth strategy is set for 2025, and it is led by a purpose. And I think I would start by saying, in this day and age, you know, news, as we well know, travels so fast with digital media, you know, LinkedIn, et cetera. And I think, you know, it's much easier. Transparency is the name of the game these days, and it's much easier to understand what companies are doing. So purpose is an important aspect of how you talk about yourself. I think it's a way of representing the culture of a company. And for us, our purpose, and we do have a new purpose guiding that strategy, it's our North Star, if you will. And I think, you know, I was just telling Carl and Wendy and Marcella before we started that over half our workforce is now millennials or younger. And I think, you know, the younger generations are using that as a filter, as a barrier to entry for making purchase decisions, particularly with FMCG type products. So they want to understand that purpose. And the fact you couple that with the very kind of transparent messaging that's out there now that you can't escape, it has to be underpinned by an authentic program. But most of all, you know, so we have lots of stakeholders. We have the employees, we have the people who buy our products, we have our retailers, et cetera, the investors, which play such a key role. You know, it's got to be authentic, and we do believe, we truly believe that it's our North Star, and it is the source for growth, for business growth. It's part of our business strategy. It's built in there, and there's lots of evidence out there now. Today, Marcella can talk about Unilever's results showing that growth is truly outpacing, for sustainable products, growth is outpacing, you know, just core products. So we think it's you know, non-negotiable. It's the only way to go.
Thank you, Marcella. Over to you.
But just Anne gave the punchline. Basically, when people ask me why, I said it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the right thing to do for business, right? Right for society and for individuals, right for business. And Anne hinted to it, right? I mean, I can simply say that our sustainable, purposeful brands have done much better than our regular brands. So if you want to talk about ESG, the proof is in the pudding, as they said. We have the numbers and we can demonstrate that. If you want to talk about impact to the community, to people, to society, we can also talk about that in terms of what does it mean to really advance and promote fundamental rights? What does it mean to be inclusive and to promote gender right? When I came to Unilever and I was promoting this, they said to me, why women and not men? And I say, it's not women's supremacy, it's not men against women, it's all together, right? And we, in studies that I did, I demonstrated that we did together in the company, we demonstrated that women are one of the largest, have over 70% of the purchasers of our products. They're across our business, they're, across our operations. I mean, it's incredible. I listened to Anne's background. I mean, not to take for granted the engineering degrees and all the things that you have, because in general that hasn't been there before. And now putting effort in that kind of titles is sort of even up everything. And the same with men. I mean, to know and acknowledge that there is a role in the family, right? To paternity leave, and to really not only talk about it but get it done. And I think that promotes a much better, not only balance, social balance, but it just, it helps that virtuous cycle of growth. So that's what I would say for once. Yeah, to start.
Okay, terrific. How about you, Carl?
Certainly, and I have a view that's, because I work in a bank, is maybe a little bit more macro and market based, but I couldn't agree more with what Anne and Marcella was saying. And the way I think about it is, when you think of different aspects of sustainability, whether it's energy transition or social aspects, things like that, say on the energy transition, there's a scientific pathway that's relatively well understood. And I think that could kind of lull us into believing that maybe there's a blueprint for all these things. But I think as we move forward, these are very complex equations, right? And very complex interactions that we need to negotiate. And, to Anne's point as well, of trying to build a business that really embraces sustainability and all that. And in that, we all have our parts to play, as you said, Wendy. But also, I think, especially in this part of the world, probably some of the weight falls a little bit disproportionately to corporations to lead the way and really figure out what these interactions look like in the real world and on the ground. And certainly, what a genuinely vibrant social interaction looks like, right? It goes beyond philanthropy. It's actual engagement with communities, things like that. And same on the energy transition side. And certainly from a banking perspective or finance perspective, as you extend into sustainable finance, these are markets that are still essentially being built, being created. So the leadership matters there in creating the market and setting the standards. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, clarity of vision, shared purpose, that kind of effectiveness in getting messages across and acting on that's also the real signs of leadership that can start to open up the market too. So I could not agree more. It's absolutely essential.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. And we're going to get into more of the specifics of your key sustainability initiatives at each of your companies in a minute. But first, I'm sure our audience will be interested in your personal career journeys, how you got involved in this area and why it's so important to you personally. Why don't we start with you, Marcella?
Okay, let me take, of course, a pleasure. When you asked us that question to prepare, I was thinking about, well, I think that it may have been from cradle, right? I think that it starts with the life experience. I mean, I didn't study anything of this. I grew up the accent comes from Argentina. I often say I'm Argentinian by birth, I'm American by choice. And, in Argentina were tumultuous years, and I witnessed a lot of stuff. My democratic, we are not going to get political, but my democratic, education was in US. I mean, really learning about what the institutions meant to be, etc. And I'm business by training. But at a certain point early on in my career, I was transferred to Europe, had to come back to US, and there was the CEO of a company, fashion company, in the early 90s who says, I'm having these problems in Central America. You have been, a controller, financial director, you know the area. Would you come with me and tell me what you think? And that was the beginning. It was the early 90s when I came back. I put together what I call probably the blueprint for one of the first global human rights and social responsibility programs in the fashion industry. And it was amazing. It was early in my career. Later on, I had the privilege with Professor Paul Martin at Columbia. He asked me, how did you put it together? And I said, it was a little bit of business. It was a little bit of personal experience, a little bit of having the sensitivity to understand some of the important elements, and really a drive to put responsible in front of business and sustainable in front of business. To know that I was for certain driven and encouraged by business, but I wanted to see business done in a way that it was a win-win. And the rest is history. I mean, there were many iterations to that, and I can tell you we can talk a lot, but I want to Anne and Carl to do it. I have been very, very privileged to be able to drive that in the fashion industry. And then it was Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever, who brought me to Unilever, and it was a totally different industry, but a tremendous opportunity and scale to have change. So that's my story.
Terrific, and I love the idea that you put the new adjectives of responsibility and sustainability in front of business. That's a very vivid and strong statement, and I love it. Anne, let's go over to you on this one.
Sure. And so what I find so interesting as I meet kind of my peers out there in these types of sessions or in some of these consortiums that I'm actually on CGF with Marcella, is that we all come from different backgrounds, and I think it's fascinating. In my case, I grew up at Colgate in the supply chain. I've actually been at Colgate a very long time. Ashamed to admit this is my 30th year, so long time. And I have to thank Colgate for that, because they've allowed me to learn and grow, which is at the core of what's very important to me in my career all along the way. And I've been able to kind of cross all 4 of our categories. So for those of you who don't know Colgate, hopefully you know we make toothpaste. So we're an oral care company, but we also make personal care, home care, and pet care products. So I've worked across all 4 categories around all the divisions around the world and moved around a lot in the supply chain, running factories, running kind of the networks, and then, most recently the customer service and logistics, the commercial end of it. And then about 3 years ago, I came back to our headquarters in New York, and my boss asked me to head up supply chain strategy and global sustainability. And I like to say, out of all my learning curves at Colgate, my growth curves, the getting into sustainability was the steepest one by far, because there was just so much going on. But the fascinating thing about sustainability over the last 3 years, if anybody's been in this career space, it's just growing like this. It's just, there's so many things going on, it's been tremendously interesting. And that's why I took that certificate at the University of Cambridge, which was tremendously helpful to me and recommended by other folks who were in the same situation as me. So I also have 4 kind of Gen Z, borderline millennial kids who are on my back every 5 minutes. So it wasn't a foreign space for me, but one they're very passionate about. So I get it at home as well. But, in the last 3 years, we've done a tremendous amount a lot of work around building our sustainability and social impact strategy. And we'll probably get a chance to talk a little more about that in a minute. But I've really been passionate about building that and embedding it across the company. That's my big passion right now. And most recently, a little over a year ago, I've convinced Colgate that I needed to focus my efforts strictly on sustainability. So now I'm in the role of Chief Sustainability Officer. So I couldn't be, more happy. It's been a great experience so far, and continuing to learn and grow.
And certainly the diversity of your experience and having worked across the supply chain, and Marcella, your diversity really informs this role, because sustainability involves so many aspects of company operations, employee engagement, as well as the social impact. So that's very interesting to hear. And Carl, we'd love to hear about your background. You have an interesting perspective, even just in your role at Societe Generale.
Yeah, and I must say, I think every job I've ever had, I just kind of stumbled into a little bit, never knowing where, what the next step was going to be. But like I grew up in France, actually, so French is my first language, and I always had a very academic bent to the way I thought about the world and approached things. So, initially I wanted to be like a nuclear physicist, but then I realized I just don't like math enough to be able to do that. I was always really interested in trying to figure out, how concepts intersect, what they're really telling us, right? Not what everybody is saying, but what do these things really tell us once you observe them and all that. And with that, I was very, very fortunate to get a degree in economics from Yale University. I know this is a Princeton club, so don't hold it against me. But and what I found really interesting about economics too was that it's a lot of psychology, right? That tries to present itself, and most economists would probably hate me for saying that, present itself a little bit scientifically, right? And that's one of the things that's guided me through my career as well. This notion that when you observe people's behavior and the behaviors of corporations and how people react to situations, I think it tends to be, emotion that drives behavior, right? Much, much more than rational thinking in most cases. And certainly, I worked in London. I worked in Russia for a little while. And at one point I landed at Moody's and started writing the methodologies that in many ways they still use today for corporates. And it was a little bit of the sense of trying to capture, how decisions are made and how they intersect with some of the more technical tools that we have. And so over time that grew into an advisory kind of group that we built at SocGen to kind of accompany our clients through these difficult decision trees and thought processes, and really just trying to simplify decisions for people. And as what I was doing, which was more on the credit rating side, naturally grew into stakeholder balance questions and everything, it very naturally morphed into a sustainability role. And I was probably one of the most surprised people to end up in that role. But a lot of what we'd like to say, because we're very client focused, is we try to make sure, or our goal is to make people feel confident, competent, safe in their decision making process. We just happen to do it through sustainability and all that. So it's very much about understanding what motivates embrace of sustainability, resistance to sustainability, and what it actually takes to move the needle.
And who knows, you may actually come back to your initial goal of being a nuclear physicist in an indirect way by working with a client on nuclear energy initiatives. You never know.
It's so many dreams come true, Wendy.
So Unilever and Colgate both have huge portfolios of consumer brands, as you've mentioned, and SocGen has a number of different clients. So it would be really interesting to hear about some of the key sustainability initiatives that your companies are focused on. I know Anne at Colgate, your CEO, has said, we're a caring, innovative growth company, reimagining a healthy future for people, their pets, and our planet. And Unilever is known as a leader in sustainability, across brands with your Unilever Sustainability Living Plan. So I'd love to hear about some of these initiatives. And then Carl, I'd love to learn about what you're doing with your clients in your Transform to Grow strategy at Societe Generale, and really embedding ESG throughout that. So Anne, let's start with you and your Colgate Smile program and your 2025 plan and what you're planning for us.
Right. So our like I said earlier, our North Star was that purpose statement that Wendy just shared with you, and really reimagining a healthier future for people, pets, and their planet, because we really do think our products help inspire health and sustainability for people that take our products home. And we then, from that, kind of anchored ourselves in a mission statement for our 2025. We call it our Sustainability and Social Impact Strategy. And we built it off the premise that the Colgate brand, so we have lots of brands. Unilever has more brands than us, they're bigger. But the Colgate brand is the #1 household penetrated consumer products brand in the world. It's in 6 out of 10 homes around the world. And so we said to ourselves, at Colgate Palmolive, we're proud of the fact that that brand is in more homes than any other, and that we will help people live healthier and sustainable lives at home. So for consumer products goods, I mean, we take our products home, and how can we build purpose-driven brands to help people live more sustainably at home? So that's we want to help message to people, make people more aware of what they can do and how just their one act can cumulatively make a difference. So we have, for instance, one major initiative that's been ongoing for 5 years, which is to turn off the tap when you brush your teeth, because we are leaders in oral care. If you turn off the tap when you're supposed to brush your teeth for 2 minutes, it'll save either 4 gallons or 15 liters of water. So we're, and we measure the impact of that messaging to consumers, where we target that to the markets we target with that messaging. And we've estimated over the past 5 years or so that we've saved 155 billion gallons of water. And we also are translating that now and trying to tell the message. It also saves greenhouse gas emissions because of the energy used to turn on your water. So we've also estimated we've saved 8.3 million metric tons of greenhouse gases. But back to our strategy. So our strategy is anchored in 3 ambition spaces. And they're not, too dissimilar to other FMCG companies, but it starts with driving social impact. And then we have helping millions of homes, which really embodies those kind of behavior changes that we're trying to make and into sustainable products. And then our big bucket, which is preserving our environment, underneath which we have the big kind of climate related initiatives. And, one that's really escalated to the top in our priority list right now is eliminating plastic waste. So under those 3 big areas, we have 11 actions. And we chose the word actions very purposely because this is the decade of action. People don't want to hear you talk about it anymore. They want to see action. So we've then built a layer of important targets underneath. So they're all very measurable. So driving social impact. Now, if you can picture in your mind a big red S under driving social impact, these are things around the health and well-being of our own employees. It's around strengthening diversity, equity, and inclusion, and helping communities where we work and live. And I won't go into all the details, but these are the actions. And then again, under helping millions, picture in your mind a big MIL, and then underneath the actions that have to do with designing sustainable products and building healthy habits. And then finally, preserving our environment with a big E, and it's eliminating plastic waste, accelerating action on climate change, conserving water, responsible sourcing, and net zero waste. So take out that S-M-I-L-E and you've got smile. And I know it's corny, but it really resonates with all our employees because they can remember it, they get it. It's the Colgate smile. So, and I'm wearing my Colgate red blazer on top of it. I guess when you've been at a company 30 years, it kind of rubs off on you, right?
That's great. Thank you for explaining that. And I know you were just talking about purpose to action, which ties into Unilever's strategy very well. And Unilever does have so many brands and so many very sustainable brands. Last week, we spoke with one of your B Corps, Ben and Jerry's, with their head of social mission, Dave Rappaport, who joined us to share some of the initiatives that they were doing. And we would love to hear from you, Marcella, about some of the many initiatives you're doing as part of the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Wendy. I think that Anne was great in explaining, many of the elements of how, companies organize all this. So because she presented that, I will now then more be talking about how do we connect the dots? I mean, what does it mean? Well, we are like, Colgate have 4 categories. We have 3. We have personal beauty and personal care. We have food and refreshments, and we have home products. So if you think about for food and refreshments, if you go all the way at the beginning of times, you have smallholder farmers, meaning the very small actors that really, they are not just the larger agriculture, traders or business, but the smallholder farmer has a significant role on this. So one of the efforts that we have done in Unilever from 2010, the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, and we continue, is to say, how can that smallholder farmer do better? And it links all the way with the products, right? And with the brands. So we work in women's empowerment, many times, the issues of productivity are linked to some of the tasks that either, the family unit has in that small parcel of land. So there is the whole school of, which was deployed in several commodities of how do you do agriculture better? How do you increase your productivity? How do you increase your livelihoods? How do you make more money? How do you increase your living income? Because that has been the target. So all that translated into all that chain from that very beginning to then production, to then distribution and the home and the blueprint, if you would, of the brand translate to a brand like Knorr or a brand like Ben & Jerry's or like a brand, like some other brands that we have for tea or for other brands that may be less known in US, but in other parts of the world for ice cream and others. And that the brand, for instance, Knorr, is driving this issue of organic ingredients, right? Or we are driving less sugar in some of the products. So smaller portions for the children to combat obesity for children and in general. So all those issues, which are really societal and community issues linked together to really deploy the 3 lens, that is not only the sustainable side of it, but also the social and definitely the economic, right? And then at that level, you have also small scale retailers. Anybody who travel or you go to many places of America or other places in the world, you see small little enterprises, right? That they're mom and pop shops that, they are trying to do better and to increase. So working with them, giving them the skills for them to really expand their business is another way that you do this. Some of my favorite was when I came to Unilever in 2013, it was the campaign that Lifebuoy did in India. Lifebuoy, is one of our cleaning products, and it was all about hand washing. If any of the people on the call sort of Google Lifebuoy India advert children and hand washing, you will see an advertisement that really almost put me in tears when I came on board, because children in India, because of a whole series of diseases, etc., there's a lot of mortality, child mortality under 5 years old. So the hand washing campaign that was done with UNICEF and others in partnership was about how can we drive that and help, save children's lives and can drive better behavior. Now, that campaign that was started many years back was reenacted under COVID-19. And under COVID-19, I think that the message was, we don't care which soap you are buying, just wash your hands. And this is how you wash your hands. This is what it means, 20 seconds. And the incredible impact that campaign had back then and now was fantastic. The same with DAB, self-esteem campaign, and particularly with girls, who has been going for quite some time. And most recently, we did, they were behind also with hair rights, particularly for African-American women. There was legislation that was passed. I mean, you may have seen all of that. So I think that the combination of how we do sustainable and brands with purpose is really engage with the communities that we are in, listen to what the issues are, and really come up with solutions that they are not our solutions. It's not about marketing. It's not about other things. I mean, of course, there is a component of the scalability that we have someone like Colgate or Unilever or Rich, but it's about having that impact while we are running business. And finally, the last thing I was thinking about, I mean, there are many things I could say, but when United Nations were working on the SDGs, we were quite involved. I mean, I certainly was involved in the area of human rights. Paul Pullman was in that committee. And Paul was adamant about saying that, SDGs are not only good for the world, but they are also good business opportunity for everyone. If you think what Anne talked about plastic, or what Carl has been talking about sustainability, different efforts, etc., it is an opportunity. Is this an opportunity for all of us to, if we believe on this, to drive it? That's the future.
Thank you for that. Carl, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure. And look, the way we would tend to express it, because we're a financial institution, is a little bit different, right? Because we don't have the same kind of consumer product base necessarily. And look, what the business of a bank is essentially to, move money and risk across different time horizons. Really, that's it. So that's, you need to inject sustainability into that type of business. So there's a degree to which the bank can, move its physical infrastructure and the way it engages with communities and things like that. But the meat is probably much more around, the bank's asset portfolio, its lending portfolio, how it allocates its funding, what standards it agrees to and broadcasts and can bring other people into as well to support, and what types of new products as well the bank can create to really support sustainability of its own portfolio, but also of its client base. So, SocGen has been an early flag bearer of everything ESG and of things like the Paris Accords naturally, for quite a while and across the globe. And I think the way I think about it is, when you think of lending and banking products, a lot of it has to do with what criteria, are you meeting the right criteria to lend, or are you meeting the right criteria to do this? And there's a whole slew of criteria, many of which are financial. And I think the idea ultimately is to broaden that aperture, right, and create a new set of criteria that are also sustainable, right? But it can't be one or the other, because you're still trying to run a business. So we have, essentially armies of people working on this right now, internally at all levels of the firm, in developing, testing these standards, pushing forward the agenda, dealing with regulators. And, I'm part of these conversations locally as well. And big component of that is also how that gets embedded into our risk policy and all that. So that's part of the machinery that needs to be put in place at a bank in order to start pushing sustainability forward. And then beyond that, it becomes about the capital allocation that we do and the products that we can provide. And by products, there's a part of it that's, yes, structuring certain products to incentivize sustainable behavior by our clients. That's one thing. But also, very importantly, back to what I was saying earlier, I think it's a lot of it is creating new tools that can really help our clients figure out, what the right path for them is through sustainability, right? And to me, that's where the real business of sustainable finance needs to be. It's not about, can you get a deal done, right? But it's about what's the deal that'll strike the right balance between you being able to keep running your business, develop new avenues of vibrancy and sustainability, and really show a change in behavior that meets the kind of behavioral change that you need. So these are, long and complex conversations. There's a whole range of these types of products as well. It can go all the way down to, impact finance, where essentially you can turbocharge the efforts of corporations to really engage and support local communities, things like that. But because, transition, I think, also entails tension naturally, right? Where, and you see this on a macro basis, right? Where we still need to provide energy to, probably 10 billion people within a generation, but we need to shift the energy sources that we have. As you transition, the kind of aspirational end goal pictures that we have, we know what they are, and we're committed to them. But the real work is really understanding what the picture is today and how to best adapt to that picture and keep pushing it in the right direction. So that's a lot of the work that we're actually doing with our clients, because fundamentally that's who we depend on. And as we move forward, also I think, especially in this part of the world, we're at a stage where the social conversation part of ESG is a complex one, and we all know what the national conversation is around various levels of inequity, whether it's social, economic, racial. That's something that we need to be able to support as well, in addition to more planetary social goals. So there's all that piece of the equation to figure out as well. And as we bridge the gap between sustainable finance and sustainability as a kind of real world topic that doesn't necessarily intersect with the financial markets directly, one of the most immediate things that we're doing a lot of work around too is how to make sure that we can give finance teams within these corporations the right tools for them to feel empowered to really bring the message forward, for them to feel like they can be creative, that they're really part of the conversation with the C-suite, with the sustainability teams, with the accounting teams, the planning teams, all that kind of stuff, simply because you need all these people rowing in the same direction in order to move these giant ships around. And I think in a lot of companies, it's maybe not an ingrained habit for everybody to row in the same direction. So I hope that gives you a snapshot at least.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it. And it sounds like as you're working with clients, the drive is really to help them move forward. So I'd like to take that as a vantage point right now and talk about the fact that one of the most critical aspects to drive change is the importance of collaboration. And many say that CEOs need to step outside their traditional boundaries for collaboration with other business leaders, to collaborate in ways that at one point in time would have made them uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So for example, Colgate recently launched a recyclable toothpaste tube. And Anne, I've spoken about this initiative many times over the past few months. I'm not sure if your ears have been burning, but when Colgate launched this toothpaste tube, it took over 5 years for them to develop the technology. And when they launched it, they shared that technology. So this is something that's so critical. Unilever has stated that the problems and challenges we need to tackle call for action that goes way beyond the changes that one business can make alone. So Anna Marcella, I'd love you to speak about these pre-competitive collaborative initiatives. And why don't we start with you?
Sure. So, I mean, and Marcella knows this as well as I do, that the pre-competitive spaces, along with kind of tackling these existential issues, has really matured over the last several years. So, Wendy mentioned the recyclable tube, and I noticed in the Q&A that someone asked about what Colgate's doing around circular economy. So we did set ourselves a target. So we do so taking our overarching action to eliminate plastic waste down a notch, we have very measurable targets in place for 2025. We want to be 100% recyclable, compostable, or reusable across all our plastic packaging by 2025. We want to reduce the amount of new plastic or virgin plastic that we use by a third, and that's with taking into account growth. And then finally, we want to increase the amount of recycled content to 25% in all our plastic. So those are very measurable, and we have a roadmap to get there. It's, I used the term earlier in a meeting today. It's a little bit like climbing Mount Everest. It's not going to be an easy road to tackle, but there's no way we can do that. No way we can do that without collaboration. So and the biggest part of our business is oral care, and it's our toothpaste market. So we had to set our sights on that. So we did establish the technology. We started over 5 years ago to move it from, I don't know how many of you people know, but your typical toothpaste tube has a layer of aluminum in the middle, surrounded by plastic layers of different types of plastic, which makes it terrible for the recycling stream. It'll contaminate it. It's no good. So we have a monomaterial tube now, which we're rolling out, and for instance, in Europe, by the end of this year, 80 to 90% of our tubes will be converted, and the rest over the next 2 to 3 years, all over the world. And it's a monomaterial plastic made out of the same plastic as your milk bottle or your fabric softener bottle. So we wanted to make it so it felt like a tube. It wasn't too far of a departure for people who use our tubes. And we wanted it to go in an existing stream. And it had, most importantly, to keep the quality of our toothpaste inside at the same level that you enjoy it, to make sure you don't get cavities and the fluoride doesn't degrade and everything. So when we started that process, we didn't do it in isolation. We engaged what's known as the Association for Plastic Recyclers, or APR. So right away we started, working outside to make sure that this tube met they're sort of, in the US anyway, known as the kind of, they're recognized as the leaders in designating or not certifying, but recognizing containers as recyclable. And then as soon as we got it kind of figured out, I like to say that was only half the job. The engineering was half the job. The other half of the job now, and we have a team of people working on it, is to make sure it's accepted in the recycling industry, not just in the US, but in every country around the world. We have to repeat this exercise and meet with the local authorities and infrastructure. And we have to message to consumers and get them to understand. And the key to all this is scaling it quickly, because the MRFs, or the material recycling facilities, don't recognize Colgate tubes from Aquafresh tubes or from other tubes. So we want all other companies to come along quickly, and that includes cosmetic tubes. Actually, tubes are a pretty big part of the packaging stream. So we are encouraging, we've spoken to over 40 organizations, some competitors, some suppliers, some other types of organizations. we've shared the technology. We have a bundle book. So we're trying to get it to scale as quickly as possible. Somebody had to go first, and we decided that we had to do that. So.
Well, bravo for that. And thank you for sharing how many different groups you're bringing together on this collaboration. And Marcella, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what Unilever has also been doing in this space. And another thing you mentioned when we spoke last week, which is falls under this as well, and which was a bit shocking to me, is that as companies are working together to collaborate and drive initiatives, they also have to think about antitrust issues and Department of Labor issues. And you mentioned at one point, I think it was when you were working with PVH, having to get a DOJ waiver regarding fair labor programs you were developing, which is really surprising considering that there's such a strong social good and it's not really being initiated for a profit goal. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
So I will clarify that first. And it's true. I mean, when I was working at the, this apparel company, we were part of the Fair Labor Association, which was created by former President Clinton to eradicate sweatshops. And as companies like Nike, Adidas, Unilever, PVH, not Unilever, sorry, PVH and others, now Nestle is also there, came together, we needed a waiver for the DOJ, the Department of Justice, which we were granted. Importantly, at the time, in the early 2000s, I think it was, I spoke in US Congress in invitation of the Human Rights Caucus to just explain why this should be pre-competitive. And if there was any issue, how do we need to interpret the antitrust legislation that it has to be upheld? How do we need to apply that to to activities to the ones like Anne was just describing before? So it's really interesting, and I think that we have made a lot of progress, but it has been a significant point of discussion. Now, talking about collaboration, we do believe in a community of action. So here it is. I have a challenge for Anne, and I have one for Carl. And you're working on this incredible initiative. Now, the concern that I have from a social point of view is that new business models are not really created with poverty wages. That as you look into recycling practices and you go all over the world, the people involved are not kept in poverty, but they are addressed. And my own experience has been that when all these new business models are being put together, if you are in environmental issues, you focus on that, and you leave aside the social. If you are in social, you forget the environment, and we need to bring it together. So my offer to you to be working on to ensure that we have this element too, because I'm really focused is within the agenda of plastic, no plastic, circular economy, and innovation. We are focusing on that. And I have one for Carl. Carl, we were, Anne told you that we are in the Consumer Good Forum. And we were instrumental in really coming up with the social ambition of eradication of forced labor from supply chains. Particularly in a global economy where there is this global migrant workforce that goes and moves into places. Now, here's the challenge. You're not just, the company that has clients and you need to remind them. You, as Societe Generale, you have yourself the opportunity to have an impact. Much of the illegal traffic that there is generated from forced labor, that at the core is inequality, is that money is recirculated in the economy. It goes through bank and financial entities. That money is not under the mattress. So I offer to you, we know a lot and we can work on that. So be there and please do push because you are in the financial area. And, inequality, as Carl says, is at the core of all this. When you look into forced labor, or when you look into, many of the abuses that there is in the labor place are generated because of inequality. Nobody will risk the life of a kid or their own life, etc., if they are really prosperous in their community. So that's an issue that we are collaborating. We landed the ambition this January. on on promotion and making sure that living wage and living income is in the supplies, extended supply chains and value chains. So we cannot do it by ourselves. I mean, I need all of you. I need everyone in this call to really join in. And I want to make one comment, because people say, so well, it's a good thing to do, but it's not. Many argue that it's not the time. I think it was Morgan Stanley. There is a study that demonstrates for any company that wants to grow their business, if you increment $1 for someone who is at the medium income level, they probably will spend 4 cents in some of the basic goods. But if you give one more dollar to someone who is in poverty wage, they will invest 50% or more of that $1 into those goods. So there's tons of data, economic, for our economists on the panel, that demonstrate that it's not just a good thing, but it makes total business sense. So ready to collaborate.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And just a really quick note, but even in North America, I think the big question when we think about energy transition, right? It's so seductive for everybody to just think either it's E, right? And we'll talk technology and all that kind of stuff, or it's S and we'll talk something else, right? And I think for a lot of people, it's, let's talk philanthropy or D&I, whatever. But the view I have is by necessity, and to some of the points you were making, Marcella, it's all the same thing, right? Because we're talking massive transformation and displacement, and just in dollar terms too, very, very bluntly, who actually pays for this, right? And there's, there's corporations, but there's government, there's everyday people, right? Consumers. And in that equation, I think there's a pretty good track record often to say that, the inequality at the individual level does not decrease, right? It increases when there's that kind of transformation that's happening. So could not agree more with you, and love being given the challenge.
That's great. And I'm going to add another letter to the ESG, which is I, because sustainability is also a driver of innovation. Unilever's website says, win with our brands as a force for good, powered by purpose and innovations. So I know that Unilever, Colgate, Coca-Cola have joined the 100+ accelerator. Can you tell us about this and why it's so important? Marcella, do you want to start?
Why innovation is important?
Yeah, and the 100+ accelerator, and what kind of initiatives you're working with startup companies there.
Well, I mean, that's so we have been driving innovation for quite some time, and many of the things that you see us mainstreaming would have been either the beginning in those startups, or we also have one thing that when I came to Unilever, I really, really appreciated is the young entrepreneurs, that they are all about innovation. They come with new ideas. They have the seed. They start growing up these fantastic efforts, whether it's rural health, or is some issue of recycling, or is how do they tackle all these issues. So we look into that not only as a way to link to our business, but also as a way to generate that innovation that is needed across the world. So I think that one of the questions that we have that was presented in the panel was about circular economy. I mean, we have been working with the Stella MacArthur Foundation for quite some time. We have been working with many organizations in doing that. Now, it's not so simple as saying that, okay, one company. I mean, I think that Anne illustrated very well with that one example, that when you try to transform it, there are so many moving parts, right? Even if you want to implement all this, you just need to sometimes transform industries that instead of chemicals use alternatives, industries that develop better practices. So we are working on many of those, and I think that you saw some of our environmental regenerate also ambitions that are linked with that accelerator. And the idea is that by working together with the organization who are experts and bringing other companies, then we can get ahead of the game. And as Anne said, some of these things, as you said, shouldn't be really pre-competitive because we all need it.
Anne, would you like to add to that?
So we're excited about the Accelerator Plus, and it's a brand. It literally just came off the presses, so we're just getting started here. And we were actually really excited that Unilever came on board right about the same time we did, because we think we'll have many common problems we'll have to tackle. But maybe I'll pick on a different aspect, because I think some people are interested in the environmental targets. So we've set our goal to be net zero carbon by 2040. Unilever's by 2039, so they're going to beat us by a year. So, but that's good, right? But we're building a roadmap, and the same way with the circular economy, we have these big goals. And I always tell people at Colgate, my job is to make people uncomfortable. If we feel comfortable about the goal, then it's not ambitious enough. So we don't know. I honestly can look you guys virtually in the eye and say, we don't have all the answers how we're going to get to net zero carbon by 2040. We don't have all the answers how we're going to reduce virgin plastic by a third. Those are huge, huge targets. They're measurable for sure, but we need entrepreneurs, we need new technology, we need the accelerators out there to help us get there. We can't do it on our own. We need that, new thinking, we need innovation. I also like to say, you can't, at least at Colgate, we can't get to our sustainability goals without innovation. That's clear, but also anything we innovate is more sustainable from this day forward. That's part of our DNA. That's built in. Our chief technology officer, head of R&D and packaging, has worked very hard over the last 18 months to drive that mindset throughout our scientists and our developers. So innovation and sustainability go hand in hand, and we need to work hand in hand with others to get there.
Can I say something before we go to Carl? I know that we are short in time, but I just want to reflect on the fact that 5 years ago, plastic was not in the top issues that corporations were addressing, right? And all of a sudden, it became so visual, it became such an urgent burning platform that mobilized everybody. And we realized the need that we had. And I would say that we went from convenience to really necessity, right? I mean, using something for convenience to then. So we need to reflect on that, because I think it pins down some of the fundamental principles that we spoke today, right? Of awareness, of engaging, of collaborating, and being really aware of human behavior. I mean, that impact the use of plastic together with the environmental issue.
Thank you for that. So we're going to move to audience questions, and I like to have diverse viewpoints. So here's one for you. One of our viewers thinks that the campaign against carbon dioxide is absurd for the following reasons. CO2 is a trace element. Only 3% come from human burning fossil fuels. The billion spent so far reduces the amount of CO2 a very small percent. And ClimateGate is the hockey stick fraud. Who wants to take this one on?
Let us give it to the engineer in the group.
Okay,
Now,
Carl, you're up.
Let me start. And
Okay.
I mean,
I continue.
COVID was an absolute tragedy and terrible thing for the world, but we learned a lot during this past year plus, right? And, and I'll see if I can remember the first few months when the world came to a halt. I think that the carbon emissions reduced something like, don't quote me on this, but it was something like 2 to 3%. And if we want to halt climate rise and keep it at 1.5 to 2 degrees by 2050, we have to take 35, I think it's million or billion. I'm not good with my zeros. That's Carl's department.
Billion.
Metric tons out of the atmosphere. But there was a 6 to 7% in a short period of time was taken out. And lo and behold, Mumbai could see the Himalayas, or wherever in India, you could see the Himalayas for the first time in 50 years. You could see dolphins in the Venice canals. My boss could see, New York City skyline for the first time in as long as he could remember. I think there was visible evidence of, what happens when you drastically reduce carbon emissions in a short period of time. Now, I think we've I don't know, I haven't honestly looked at where we've gotten back to, but I know I see a lot more cars on the road again. So I don't think we're there anymore, but I do think there's evidence that reducing emissions makes a difference. And that's just more empirical data than anything else. So.
Yeah, and you could look at the space shots from NASA.
Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, clearly
So,
showed that there was.
I want to say, add up something very quickly to what Anne said. I'm not a scientist, so in looking into these issues, there's a very good video that is called by one of our category presidents that is called the carbon rainbow. And I think it's what David, I think it is in the question, was referring to us. There is a whole variety of what we call the rainbow of carbon. And there are certain carbons that you can capture and reuse, and they are the good carbons, right? So in looking into that, so David, I urge you to go and to look, I don't know where the video is, Peter Tecalva is the one presenting it, and I think it goes to what you said, and is that approach to carbon that is prompted the innovation. I'm pretty sure that is in some of the things that we are doing with companies like Colgate and the others, but it's really quite important to understand the differentiation to then focus on what matters the most, so we can have all those benefits that Anne and you, Wendy, were referring to.
So, Carl, I know you wanted to mention this, but the next question I think will be great for you to mention, if you don't mind, which is, what are the best metrics to use in order to measure success? How do we get beyond the current situation where most companies self-report and thus there are credibility greenwashing issues? We spoke last week about the virtual alphabet soup of different reporting platforms, and that creates consistency issues. Carl, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, no, look, we're still very much in a definitional phase of all these things, right? And I think it even ties back to this earlier question of, is there a carbon gate type of thing? I think there's certain aspects of things that you can accept or reject ultimately, but things like, let's just assume that, climate change is a reality and we need to address it. From that point on, there is a scientific narrative that exists and that's quantifiable, and it's a little bit of a question of math from that point forward. Now, how that gets translated all the way down to the level of individual investors or the level of individual observers and even individual corporations, that's by definition still messy today, right? And you have the environmental side of things, where again there's a specific language and there's an underpinning of climate science, so you can start to at least have some guidelines that start to make sense, that you can start to measure against certain global targets and needs and things like that. On the social side, it's even messier because we don't really have a language for it. So a few things. One, I like to think of sustainability as both a conversation and a language, right? And now we're in the process of developing the language, right? And I think what we're going to see, and this is where the question of greenwashing comes in, is the more the language develops, the more we're going to be able to see what the underlying conversation actually is for most people, right? Because Right now, we're still in a phase, and you see this in, sustainable finance and things like that, where people are looking for rules of thumb. People are looking for, shortcuts to just understand things and be able to apply them, and very rationally so. But today, we're just not quite at the point yet where we fully understand what rules of thumb actually make sense and are actually valuable or not. You can start to have an idea, but we're just not there yet. So a lot of it has to do with regulation as well, with the role of international standards, all that kind of stuff. That's a necessary part of the equation. So back to rules of thumb, we like to say things, people occasionally, the narrative will occur that, if we want to reduce carbon from the atmosphere, we want to change things, it's up to this sector to do it, or it's up to the banks to do it, or it's up to oil and gas to do it, or whatever. That's not the case, right? So much of it has to do with interaction between public and private, right? And I think a lot of these boundaries that we are accustomed to thinking of are going to get challenged. And that's both in the way things actually function, right? And also in the way information flows and standards get defined. So right now, there's a huge effort in Europe in defining standards. It's going to come to the US. It might have to be a little bit different because different markets, different regions, different cultures, the rules are probably going to be different, but the underlying principles are probably going to be the same. So we're still figuring out all these principles, and until we do, and we are making progress, it's messy. It's just messy, right? And there's just a lot of noise, and I think that's inevitable, honestly. So.
And we also have the SEC, which is going to start reviewing ESG disclosures, which should also create some accountability and clarity.
Yes.
We have a question, I think, geared toward Anne, which is, what are Colgate's initiatives for environmental sustainability that you've explained? And is there a way communities can participate in those initiatives? So I think from the community engagement angle, if you could respond to that.
Yeah, and I think we touched on that a bit earlier. Like, you can't kind of tackle these things in silos. And what I was thinking about from our angle is that when we develop, so we have the actions, we have the targets, and we are building the roadmaps, and then what sits behind that is a framework of how we're going to get the work done, and we call that our stewardship model. And when we say stewardship model, we mean, kind of the technical aspects of how we're tackling what we can control in our own supply chain, and what isn't in our control, which is, what from science-based targets is known as scope 3, which is impacting our suppliers and our consumers, are the people who buy our products. And what you may or may not know, and this is similar, I think, for Unilever, that most consumer products, if they're oral care, health care, home care, or personal care, only 10% of our environmental footprint happens when we source and procure our materials, whether it's raw materials or packaging materials, and then convert them in our factories. 90% of our footprint is when consumers take our products home and use them. So it makes a big difference how we influence and work with consumers in communities to educate them, to make them more aware. So things like turning off the tap. But if you think beyond just environment, so if you can use environmental as a broad term, because the circular economy, the work we're doing to eliminate plastic waste, to conserve water, to just eliminate waste that we put out in our factories, all of that kind of rolls up and contributes directly or indirectly to climate change. So they're all environmental impacts. So we do look at the stewardship aspect of it. We look at how we engage at the country level, at the community level, in terms of, like I said, educating and working, with those communities with what their challenges are on the ground. I think Marcella mentioned this. So it's different whether you're in Asia, completely different environment in Asia in terms of maturity and infrastructure versus a Europe who's, you know, much further along than a lot of us. So, so we do try to build these stewardship models to take into account not just, you know, the technical aspects, the engineering aspects of what we're doing to reduce, but we also look at how to make a difference locally. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how I would answer.
Yes, thank you. That was great. We have so many great questions. We only have time for one more, which is how is employee and compliance training succeeding or failing in supporting your ESG efforts? Marcella or Ann, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, the question is very good. I mean, how cannot you? I mean, what good, when I came to Unilever, I mean, we talk about embedding, it's 2013, embedding all this in at the decision-making process at that moment. So there is no choice. It has to be effective. And it cannot be talking about ESG as an expertise. It has to be about the business and the work that you do every day. And what does it mean? Someone who is making a decision of, I don't know, I think that my colleagues, you know, give different examples, but let us take, I'll give you an example of fashion, right? When I was in fashion, the designer in New York who changed his or her mind, you know, later in the process and decided to change the zipper color, all that translated into probably a factory working overnight to get that change done. So if you apply that concept to any decision that we make, how cannot you? It's not a choice, it's just a must. Everybody in the core organization needs to understand what we are talking about. And that's how we see it. Now, do we have hiccups? I mean, as Anne says, nobody's perfect. We have such challenges when you deal with business in the quantity of countries that we have with different norms, different cultures, etc. But we must succeed on that. So that's where we put our effort. And for me, what is important is to understand problems, because I need to bring solutions and enablers to those problems. And if someone didn't understand something, then we need to know, and we need to make sure that we gear our training to that. So that's, I hope, I mean, it was a great question. Thank you for asking that. And I hope I provided that different angle of how we look into this.
I think that's great. And it's a wonderful way to wrap up our discussion. And thank you, Anne, Marcella, and Carl, for joining us to share your tremendous thought-provoking insights about leading with purpose and how companies can do well by doing good. And most importantly, thank you for your leadership in ensuring that business plays an active role driving systemic change to improve our world. I'm sure you'll continue to be on the front lines leading the way. I want to also thank the Princeton Club of New York, Princeton Alumni Association of New York City, and Conscious Capitalism New York City for co-sponsoring this program. And a big thank you to all of you who joined us this evening. The Princeton Club is recording this talk and we'll send everyone the link. Please join us for our upcoming programs. On May 3rd, I'll be speaking with leading journalists from the Washington Post, Bloomberg, ABC News, and the National Review about the Biden presidency at 100 days. On May 10th, George will join us again, this time to talk about baseball, not politics. And we'll have more sustainability discussions coming up in June on green tech and protecting our oceans. So we're very glad to bring you these interesting programs that you can enjoy from the comfort of your home. Thank you again, Anne, Marcella, and Carl, for your insights and your visionary leadership. And thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you so much.